Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Gerard Pratt, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Warrant Officer Angelo Augustus. Today, we remember and commemorate the Battle of Fromelles. 100 years ago today, Major Geoffrey Gordon McRae of Hawthorn in Victoria wrote his last letter home before leading the 60th Battalion in the assault at Fromelles. Today, I lead my battalion in an assault on the German lines, and I pray God that I may come through all right and bring honour to our name. If not, I will at least have laid down my life for you and my country, which is the greatest privilege one can ask for. Farewell, dear friends. The hour approaches. Hours later, McRae was dead, one of 5,533 Australian dead, wounded and missing. He was 26 years old. The British suffered 1,547 casualties, and the Germans 1,653. It was the darkest day in Australian military history. Private Walter Jimmy Dowling of the 57th Battalion described the 15th Brigade's carnage. Hundreds were mowed down in a flicker of an eyelid, like great rows of teeth knocked from a comb. Men were cut in two by streams of bullets, swishing in a flat lattice of death. Australians of the 8th and 14th Brigades captured enemy positions and penetrated deep into German defences. But without flanking support, under fierce German counterattacks, they were forced to withdraw under brutal fire early in the morning. By dawn on the 20th of July, Australian trenches were teeming with wounded and dying. Victorians of the 15th Brigade suffered mightily in their assault on the German Sugarloaf. Their commanding officer, Brigadier Harold Pompey Elliott, a much-loved and respected veteran of the Boer War in Gallipoli, had vented opposition before the attack. Lieutenant John Schroer was in brigade headquarters when the 15th went over the top. Pompey got tired of sitting at advanced brigade headquarters and took me up to the line with him. It was impossible to walk far without falling over dead men. There must have been dozens of German machine guns. Pompey never thought of ducking, but went on right along the line. A word for a wounded man here, a pat of appropriation to a bleary-eyed digger there. He missed nobody. He never spoke a word all the way back, but went straight inside, put his head in his hands and sobbed his heart out. Bean described Pompey Elliott as speechless with grief, tears streaming down his face as he shook hands with returning survivors. Realising the significance of Fromelles to our young nation, Charles Bean returned to walk over the ground on the day of the armistice in 1918 to think, reflect and record before the battlefield returned to peace. He found the old man's land simply full of our dead. The skulls and bones and torn uniforms were lying about everywhere. He described Fromelles as one of the bravest and most hopeless assaults ever undertaken by the AIF. On this site today, at VC Corner, is the only Australian cemetery without headstones or epitaphs. A stone wall sits in the middle of the former no man's land, inscribed with the names of 1,299 Australians with no known grave. Two mass graves nearby contain the remains of 410 unidentified Australians, casualties of muddled planning and reckless decision-making. We warmly welcome Ms Valentine Huchette on behalf of the village of Fromelles, whose grandfather was the Mayor of Fromell during the recovery, identification and reburial of Allied soldiers in Pheasants Wood. We also welcome those watching the ceremony in France at Fromell. We welcome the veterans who have served, those who are still serving, and the families that support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony from across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors and students on behalf of the following schools. From Queensland, Sunshine Coast Grammar School, Roma Middle School and Corinna State School. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front right through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, in France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Second Lieutenant Stuart Munro. Stuart Munro was born around 1882 to Hugh and Julia Munro of Woodford Dale on the Clarence River, New South Wales. His father's family were early pioneers of the Clarence River district, and Stuart probably grew up on his father's property. Little is known of his early life. Although his birth was recorded in Maclean in New South Wales, when he enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force, Stuart said that he had been born in Portree on the Isle of Skye in Scotland. He gave his brother Norman's name as his next of kin and said that he was working as a solicitor. Stuart Munro enlisted in the AIF in October 1914 at the age of 32. He underwent a period of training in Australia before leaving for active service overseas in December 1914 with reinforcements to the 3rd Battalion. He left Australia as an orderly room sergeant, but would later be commissioned as an infantry officer. He was first sent to Egypt, arriving not long after the AIF had returned from Gallipoli. There he met Lieutenant Robinson, who later described him as short, had been dark-haired and was going grey, and was not good looking. He wore a small scrubby moustache. He was a plucky little fellow and a decent little chap. The pair continued training with the 3rd Battalion in the Egyptian desert. The AIF was undergoing a period of expansion and reorganisation at the same time, and as part of this process, both were transferred to the newly formed 55th Battalion. The 55th Battalion was one of the last Australian battalions to arrive in France, but was among the first to see major action. On the 19th of July 1916, less than a month after arriving on the Western Front, the 55th Battalion took part in the Battle of Fromelles, a disastrous feint designed to draw German reserves away from the Battle of the Somme further to the south. Although originally in reserve, the 55th was quickly drawn into the fighting and suffered heavy casualties. By the following day, the Australian force had sustained more than 5,500 casualties. One of those posted missing at the end of the battle was 2nd Lieutenant Stuart Munro. His family struggled to find out what had happened to him, at times receiving information that he was simply missing, at other times hearing rumours that he had been killed. It was not until the following year that a court of inquiry determined that Stuart Munro had been killed in action. In 1917, the family received a letter from Sergeant Howard of the 55th Battalion in reply to their inquiry as to Stuart's fate. He wrote, "We charged at 6 o'clock and took the German trenches in 20 minutes and held them for 11 hours when we were beaten back by a counter-attack. I did not see him fall. All I know is that they asked for volunteers to go out the next night to search no man's land, and I was sergeant in charge of this party. It was during this search that I came across the body of Lieutenant S. Munro, shot through the body, lying very peacefully." Howard reported that they successfully removed Munro's body from the battlefield and buried him nearby. However, that grave has since been lost, and today he is commemorated on the Australian National Memorial at Villers-Bretonneux. Stuart Munro was 34 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among more than 60,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember 2nd Lieutenant Stuart Munro, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Catapult party, present up.
lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catapult party. Now words. Turn. Catapult party. Quick. Out.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out at Pozieres or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.